Okay, good afternoon, everyone. People will continue to drift into the room in just a moment, but I'd like to get things started because we have a substantial number of you here already. And many of you will have seen me. I'm Bruce Watson. I gave a very short explanation during the inaugural day, and I'll be giving a lecture as well in the coming days. More interestingly, let me please introduce right now Dr. Thomas Attema, who you will see on the screen. And Thomas is a senior researcher in the Applied Cryptography and Quantum Applications Department of TNO. TNO, for those of you in South Africa, TNO is the Dutch equivalent of the CSIR, so a research institute that does applied research. He also happens to be with the cryptology group at what's called the CBE, which is the Center for Mathematics and Computing in Amsterdam. And he relatively recently, in 2023, obtained his PhD at Leiden University. But make no mistake, he's got a very long track record in cryptography as well, which is why we're hearing from him today. So he focuses on the development of new cryptographic techniques which are capable of withstanding quantum attacks. So in other words, they're quantum resilient or quantum resistant, and also allowing data to be analyzed in a privacy-preserving manner. So his talk today will be on post-quantum cryptography migration in particular. And if you work for an organization already and you haven't heard about this, you're potentially on the verge of being in some trouble because it's a significant amount of effort that's required for that as well. So Thomas is now going to explain all of the rest of that to us. And it's with pleasure that I introduce Thomas, and please take it away.
Well, thank you very much for the great introduction. Let me try to share the right screen. Let's see. Is my presentation visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Alpha. So indeed, I will be talking about post-quantum cryptography and especially the migration towards post-quantum cryptography, why this migration is necessary, and when we should be starting to take action in this migration process.
We unmuted him?
Thomas, you are muted. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Okay, that's strange. Can you hear me right now?
Oh.
Can you hear me right now?
Yes, I can. Thanks, Thomas.
Okay, my bad. So thanks again for the.
Can you try saying something again? Because I couldn't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Okay, great. Resume, please. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry for that. Not sure what happened, but so thanks again for the great introduction. Today I will be indeed be talking about post-quantum cryptography and the migration towards post-quantum cryptography, why this is needed, and which actions we need to be taking as of now. So I will start with a short introduction into cryptography. Then I will talk a little bit about designing cryptographic primitives, how we do that, and which steps are essential in this process. Then I will talk briefly about quantum computing and its effect on cryptography. And then I will dive into post-quantum cryptography, which is the field of study and cryptography that is secure against quantum computers. And then finally, I will be talking a little bit about the migration process from our current cryptographic systems towards these post-quantum cryptographic primitives. So cryptography, probably all of you know this already, but to make sure that we're all on the same page, what cryptography traditionally tries to do is it tries to protect communication channels. So between Alice and Bob. Alice and Bob try to communicate together, and they want to make sure that an eavesdropper, an adversarial eavesdropper, cannot listen in on this communication channel. So that's what cryptography aims for, and its primary goal, or the best known goal, is confidentiality. We do not want Eve to be able to read into the messages sent by Alice to Bob. But cryptography does more than that. It also focuses on integrity. So making sure that Eve cannot change the message that Alice sends to Bob, and also on authenticity. So making sure that Eve cannot send messages on Alice's behalf to Bob. So both integrity and authenticity are equally important, as important as confidentiality in cryptography. And the final goal that cryptography also strives towards is non-repudiation, which basically means that if Alice sends a message to Bob, then she cannot deny having sent this message. So nowadays in our digital society, cryptography is omnipresent. When we visit the website, when we send a message via WhatsApp or email, when we make a payment with our debit or credit card, we're all making use of cryptography to protect these communication channels. And without cryptography, all of these functionalities are impossible. So cryptography is really at the foundation of our communication channels. And of our cybersecurity measures. And cryptography has existed for a very long time. So the first accounts of cryptography go back thousands of years already. And already for thousands of years, it has been an everlasting battle or arms race between, on the one hand, the code makers trying to protect the information, and on the other hand, the attackers, the eavesdroppers trying to break these codes. And one of the first examples of cryptography, or maybe a predecessor of cryptography, are the non-standard hieroglyphs. So basically, instead of using standard hieroglyphs, minor modifications were made such that the hieroglyphs seemed unintelligible. And the goal of this was mainly to create a puzzle or a nice challenge for travelers along the route. And these puzzles were solved, and that was basically breaking these early accounts of cryptography. A better known example of cryptography is the Caesar cipher, used by Julius Caesar in the Roman times to encrypt its communication to its generals. And 100 years later, well after the end of the Roman Empire, this Caesar cipher was broken, and we cannot use it any longer to encrypt communication. So we see the code makers created a new cipher, and then it took quite some time, but at some point the code breakers broke this cipher. Then in the 1500s, Vignere designed another cipher, which was deemed very secure, and they even called it le chiffre indéchiffrable, which basically means or translates to the unbreakable cipher. So back in the 1500s, they thought, well, this is a very strong cipher and no one will ever be able to break it. Well, what happened? It took over 300 years, but in the end, also this cipher was broken. Another example is the Enigma code used by the Germans in the Second World War to encrypt their communication channels. And for instance, by the work of Alan Turing, also this cipher, this encryption technique was broken. And thereby the course of the Second World War was heavily influenced. So then in the 70s, cryptography went through sort of a revolution. Public key cryptography, I will talk about that a little bit later on, was introduced, and making cryptography applicable to much more people, and bringing it from only the military applications before to large-scale adoption. And the protocol that I mentioned here, the RSA protocol, is still being used today to protect our communication channels. However, in 1994, so that's already quite some time ago, Peter Shor came up with a quantum algorithm. And what he basically showed is that if we have a quantum computer that is strong enough, large enough, then I will have an algorithm for you to break the RSA protocol. So already in 1994, the RSA protocol was theoretically broken. And why only theoretically? Well, because in 1994, we did not have a quantum computer. So this was all, the quantum computing in the 90s was still science fiction, and there was nothing near to breaking cryptography back then. So we didn't really worry that much about this quantum algorithm because we didn't have a quantum computer yet. But this is changing quite rapidly. Over the last 10, 20 years, a lot of efforts have gone into building a quantum computer. And there's steady progress in that field. So maybe at some point in 2030, 2040, 2050, maybe a little bit later, there will be a quantum computer capable of running Shor's algorithm and thereby breaking the RSA protocol. So I mention all of this in this timeline to put the quantum computer and post-quantum cryptography a little bit into perspective, because it seems to be simply the next chapter in this arms race between, on the one hand, code makers and on the other hand, code breakers. So, and in this next chapter, code breakers will have access to quantum computers as well. So we have to take that threat into account. So if we dive a little bit deeper into cryptography, then we can see that we can divide cryptography into two main categories. On the one hand, we have symmetric cryptography, where both Alice and Bob, both the sender and the receiver, use the same cryptographic key to encrypt and decrypt information. And some of the schemes that we've just seen, like the CFIF cipher, the Vignera cipher, the Enigma code, they all use, or they all fall under this category of symmetric cryptography. And nowadays we have more modern variants that are still secure. So in particular, AES is an algorithm, a symmetric cipher that is broadly deployed. And this is a very efficient way of performing cryptography, but one of the big problems here is that you need to share the secret key before you can communicate. So you need, Alice and Bob need to share the secret key before they can communicate, and this is called the key distribution problem. And this is quite a challenging problem if you want to use cryptography to protect all your communication channels. So the other category of cryptography is called asymmetric or public key cryptography. And as I mentioned earlier, this was introduced in the 70s, and it's actually a much more powerful functionality that it realizes. Namely, public key cryptography makes use of two different keys, one key for encryption and another key for decryption. So the encryption key, so the public key can be made public. Everyone can see and receive this public key because it's only used for encryption. And only the decryption key, you should make it private. And you should keep it a secret. So this is a much more powerful cryptographic primitive that solves this key distribution problem, and it allows you to deploy cryptography on a much broader scale. The security of public key cryptography is typically based on certain hard mathematical problems, and asymmetric cryptography is usually combined with symmetric cryptography. So basically, asymmetric cryptography is used to share a secret key, and the secret key is then used in the symmetric algorithms. And this is done merely for efficiency purposes, because symmetric key cryptography is still more efficient than asymmetric cryptography. So these are the two main categories, and I will mainly focus on the second one, because firstly, it's a more powerful primitive, and secondly, the quantum computers most severely impact the field of asymmetric cryptography, and the impact on the symmetric cryptography is much less severe. So let us now continue to the second agenda item, so designing cryptographic primitive. How does that work? So again, let's focus on public key encryption. Then we have a number of naive or standard functionalities that we would like to have. So the first one is that encryption should be easy. Everyone should be able to efficiently encrypt its information and send it to the receiver. You do not want to require a supercomputer to perform an encryption procedure, for instance. For the same reason, decryption with the private key should also be easy. or you should be able to do this efficiently. However, decryption without the private key, that should be extremely difficult, because this is precisely what an adversary, what an eavesdropper is going to try to do. It's going to intercept your communication and try to decrypt it without having knowledge of the private key. So we see that what we're looking for is an object, something that has this asymmetry. Decryption with the private key should be easy, but decryption without the private key should be hard. And if we try to make this a little bit more abstract, what we need is an object that's called a one-way function. One-way function is sort of a function such that it is easy to go from A to B, but it's very hard to go back from B to A. So going from A to B, you could see that as, for instance, encrypting your information, and going from B to A, you could see as decrypting your information without the private key. So this is the mathematical object that we're looking for if we want to design a cryptographic protocol. So let's give a very simple example, maybe factorization. Going from A to B, which is multiplying, is very easy. So you can easily compute 7 times 13 is 91. You can do that even without a pen and paper. Maybe the second two examples are a little bit harder, but you can still do this without a calculator. And even if the numbers grow larger and larger, the computation becomes a bit more difficult, but you can still do it, especially if you have a calculator or a computer helping you out. However, the reverse, so factorization, is a very difficult problem. So if I start with 57 and I ask you to give the prime factors of this number, then with a little bit of trial and error, you will probably find out that 57 equals 3 times 19. So this is still quite easy to do. Now, if I make the number a little bit bigger, it's probably still doable, but it's not going to be a fun exercise anymore. And let alone if I make the number even bigger. So hopefully this gives a little bit of intuition on a problem that for which going in one direction is quite easy. So the multiplication is quite an easy operation, but going in the other, in the reverse direction, so the factorization is a very difficult problem. So, and even if we use a computer or a supercomputer to do this, if the numbers become big enough, then the factorization problem is just going to be infeasible. So in this factorization problem was actually exactly the problem that was used to design the RSA encryption scheme in 1978. And mostly, this not only holds for RSA encryption, but for many other schemes. We do not know how to prove security, and security is only assumed to hold. So this sounds like a very weak property, which in some sense it is. But what actually happens when we design a cryptographic primitive, we try to relate security to the hardness of this mathematical problem. So for instance, the RSA encryption, we can relate it, the security of the RSA scheme, we can relate it to the hardness of the integer factorization problem. And then we try to do a lot of cryptanalysis, which basically means we try to analyze the scheme and try to find vulnerabilities and try to build up a certain level of trust in these schemes. So this cryptanalysis is crucial because it allows you to invalidate the assumptions. So if there was an invalid assumption, you can discard the insecure schemes that you built from the invalid assumptions. And it also allows you to actually quantify this presumed hardness too. And then that's required when you have to select the key sizes and the parameter sizes of your scheme. So this cryptanalysis is actually crucial when designing cryptographic protocols. And what actually happens is that it takes many years before a new scheme can be deployed. Because after many years of cryptanalysis, we sort of build a level of trust in these schemes that if many cryptographers have tried and failed to break a scheme, then maybe it is actually secure and we can deploy it in practice. So this gives you a bit of an insight on how you design cryptographic protocols and which parts are important in this design process. So let's bring quantum computers and quantum computing into the picture. So quantum computers, they work fundamentally different than classical computers. Instead of using bits, so bit is a 0 or a 1, they make use of qubits, and qubits are actually linear combinations of this 0 and a 1. And they allow you to perform different kinds of computations, make different algorithms. And for some problems, it's actually much easier to solve. Some problems are much easier to solve on a quantum computer by using these qubits than on a classical computer. There's quite a few challenges when building a quantum computer, for instance, in designing in the coherence times or the noise rates of these qubits. So these qubits are very fragile objects, and they will typically be noisy, and it's very difficult to reduce the amount of noise and also to scale the quantum computer. So starting with 1 qubit, now we more or less know how to do that, but building a quantum computer with several hundreds of qubits is already extremely complicated. So there's various challenges in building quantum computers. But once we are able to solve these challenges, we actually know that they can be quite powerful in solving certain problems. And because this is a fundamentally different way of computation, they actually redefine which computational problems are hard. So some problems that were hard for classical computers turn out to be quite easy for quantum computers. What is very important to realize is that quantum computers are not just supercomputers. They're not just a normal computer, but with more resources, with more power. It's really fundamentally different way of performing the computations. So I emphasize this because not all the problems that we know that can be solved more efficiently or faster on a quantum computer. For some problems, you will still need a classical computer. So let's try to translate this field of quantum computers to cryptography and the threats that quantum computing poses on cryptography. So I already mentioned Shor's algorithm. So Shor's algorithm solves this period finding problem, and it can actually find the period of certain functions exponentially faster than classical computers can do that. And the effect is that it basically breaks all the public key cryptography with a so-called cyclic structure. And it happens to be the case that factorization and also the discrete logarithm problem have this cyclic structure and can thus be solved efficiently with Shor's algorithm. Thereby, the cryptographic primitives that are based on these two problems will be vulnerable to quantum attackers. And RSA is one of the examples there. We also have Grover's algorithm. That's a different quantum algorithm. You can use it to search an unstructured database. So you can, for instance, use it to search for a cryptographic key. This algorithm is in some sense more generically applicable because you do not need this cyclic structure, so it doesn't really use any structure of the underlying problem. But on the other hand, the speed up is only quadratic. So we don't have this exponential speed up. So the effect of Grover's algorithm cryptography is much less severe. So if we translate it to these two categories of cryptography, then we see that the symmetric key primitives, they are weakened by quantum attacks by using Grover's algorithm. And for asymmetric or public key cryptography, we see that the schemes mentioned here are completely broken by quantum attacks. So the effect of quantum computing on cryptography is quite severe. It can be quite drastic, but the big caveat is that we don't have a quantum computer yet capable of running these quantum algorithms. So how far along are we? And when will quantum computers be able to break cryptography? So this is a very difficult question with a lot of uncertainty. Skeptics even say that this will never happen, which, yeah, there's definitely reasons to believe it will be very difficult to build such a quantum computer. But at the same time, we've seen quite a few developments. So a few years back in 2019, Google first claimed quantum supremacy, where they basically showed that they could solve a problem on a quantum computer that was unsolvable classically. So the caveat here is that this problem was a useless problem. So it did not have any practical relevance. So the actual aim or the actual goal that we're now trying to achieve is quantum utility, where we run a quantum algorithm on a quantum computer and solve an actually relevant problem. And more recently, we see vendors claiming that we're actually nearing the era of quantum utility, and some some claims have already appeared that we've reached the era of quantum utility. So this also already shows you a little bit that quantum computers are becoming more mature and becoming more and more capable of solving relevant problems. So the relevant problems I mentioned earlier are definitely not breaking cryptography. There's still a long way ahead of us before quantum computers will be able to break cryptography. So you could ask yourself, when will this happen? And this graph gives you a little bit of insight in that direction. So what we see here on the left-hand side is all sorts of quantum computers and the number of qubits that they have. So we see all the dots, and you see it's quite a bit of a mess. And the reason is that we have a lot of different paradigms in building quantum computers, and they all have their sort of pros and cons. So some of them have less qubits, but for instance, more stable qubits with less noise. So that also shows you a little bit that the number of qubits is not the only figure of merit that you should be taking into account. But looking a little bit at these developments, we do see a trend, sort of an improvement in the quantum computing capabilities that we have. And yeah, if you sort of extrapolate this trend a little bit and then take into account the green line stating the number of qubits that you need to break RSA 2048, then it could be within the next decades that quantum computers will be mature enough to break cryptography. But again, I must mention that there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's very hard to make accurate estimates in this direction. So it will probably take years before quantum computers break cryptography, but at the same time, we also know that from previous cryptographic migrations, that it's very complicated to migrate your cryptography to new algorithms. We've seen DES and MD5, those are cryptographic primitives that were turned out to be insecure, so we needed to replace them by other cryptographic algorithms. And it has taken, in some cases, more than 10 years or even 15 years before we migrated away from the use of these vulnerable algorithms. So taking this complexity and these timelines into account, you should be starting your migration quite soon, well before quantum computers actually reach this level of maturity. Moreover, encrypted data can already be eavesdropped now and decrypted later. So this is what is called the store now, decrypt later attack. And if you're now communicating, for instance, highly sensitive or confidential information, such as state secrets, and also 10 years or 20 years from now, this information should probably remain secret, which means that already now you should start taking the threats 10 or 20 years, or the computing capabilities 10, 20 years from now into account. So these two considerations have sort of been summarized by Michele Mosca in his theorem. where he basically stated that if your time to update your IT infrastructure plus the time you want your information to be protected exceeds the time that is required to develop a large enough quantum computer, then you have a big problem. So taking these three variables into account, X, Y, and Z, you should start considering migrating to post-quantum cryptography. And for these reasons, in May 2020, President Biden sent out this US White House memorandum, where it basically directs government agencies to take action against this quantum threat and to start migrating towards post-quantum cryptography. So what is this post-quantum cryptography now exactly? So very briefly, post-quantum cryptography is cryptography that is secure against quantum attackers. It is based on different mathematical problems that are assumed to be hard even for quantum computers. So instead of using the factorization problem or the discrete logarithm problem, we try to use other problems that are hard even for quantum computers. And there's actually quite a few different mathematical platforms or mathematical problems to choose from. So we can build cryptography from lattices, hash-based cryptography, code-based cryptography, multivariate systems of equations or isogenies, and there's still a few other approaches that are that give us viable post-quantum candidates. So to streamline and to improve the adoption and development of post-quantum cryptography, the National Institute for Standards and Technologies in the US, they started this post-quantum standardization competition back in 2016. And the goal was to come up with the first standardized cryptographic algorithms secure against quantum computers. So this was quite a lengthy process, but we're now nearing the end. This call started with over 80 submissions, 80 candidates submitted to the competition. And in the end, we have 4 winners, 1 key encapsulation mechanism and 3 digital signature schemes that are ready to be standardized. Last year, the first set of draft standards was released. So that's what we see here, the FIPS 203, 204, and 205. Draft standards are available. The fourth one will be a little bit delayed. And we expect, hopefully, April this year to have these standards finalized, which means that they can be deployed worldwide. So the fact that this competition took almost 8 years already shows that standardization is not a straightforward process. And the reason is what I said earlier in the beginning of this presentation, is that this cryptanalysis is actually essential. So it takes a lot of time to analyze schemes and to build this level of trust and to make sure that the cryptographic primitives that are standardized do not contain any vulnerabilities. And even though we have this global initiative with a lot of researchers involved, we saw in July 2020, so that was 6 years into the NIST competition, that one of the very promising candidates, so SIDE, was completely broken. But it was quite surprising that so late in the competition, one of the cryptographic schemes was completely broken. So this shows that you have to be very careful and you have to be conservative in choosing your cryptography. Another example was more recent, December last year, so only a few months ago, the Kyber / side channel attack was published. The effect of this attack was less severe. It was not a fundamental flaw in the cryptographic algorithm, but it was a flaw in how some people had implemented the algorithm. So fortunately, it's quite easy to mitigate this vulnerability, but it does show that even if we have well-studied schemes, then you should be very careful in how to implement these schemes and to make sure that you do not introduced undesired vulnerabilities. So let us now move to the final point of the final part of this presentation, migrating to post-quantum cryptography. So I already mentioned that designing cryptography is a lengthy and complicated procedure, but migrating to post-quantum cryptography is also going to be quite hard, and we will actually encounter several technical challenges. Some of these challenges we've already obtained a bit of hands-on experience by performing migrations. But one of the technical challenges that you might encounter is that post-quantum cryptography is different from classical cryptography. So for instance, the keys, the cryptographic keys that you're using may be bigger. The ciphertext that you're sending, that you're communicating may be bigger. You might require more computational resources to perform an encryption or decryption procedure. So all of this may impact your IT infrastructure, and sometimes it will just break down because of these stronger requirements. So implementing post-quantum cryptography is not just a matter of plug and play, taking out the old algorithm and plugging in a new one. There's usually different steps to take and challenges to solve. Also, we now see that the field of cryptography has diversified quite a lot. So before we had RSA analytic curve cryptography, now we have many different protocols available, so you have to choose from these protocols. It's definitely not straightforward to choose the best algorithm. So that's one of the challenges, and also all of these algorithms have their own pros and cons. So some might be very efficient in terms of computation time that you need to encrypt the message, while others have very small key sizes. So it also depends a lot on the application, which cryptographic algorithm you have to choose. I already mentioned that there may also be risks in implementing and deploying new cryptography. There may be undiscovered vulnerabilities. How do you deal with these risks? How do you mitigate them? And moreover, it's very likely, given the fact that the field is still progressing and there's still many more new results being presented on cryptography and new algorithms being designed, that this is not going to be the last migration. So for that reason, many organizations advise to design your cryptography or your communication infrastructure in an agile way. Basically meaning that if you have to migrate, if you have to change cryptography in the future, that you can do that in a plug and play manner. So this basically requires a complete redesign of many IT infrastructures. And besides these technical challenges, there are also a lot of non-technical challenges. So you have to take legislation into account. There's organizational challenges. You have to be interoperable with other organizations. If you as an organization decide to deploy one cryptographic primitive, and another organization decides for another cryptographic primitives, then it's going to be quite hard to communicate together. There's supply chain dependencies. You're depending on vendors that build cryptographic devices. You have to make sure that these devices are migrated in a timely manner. So there's quite a few challenges to be encountered when migrating to post-quantum cryptography. So for this reason, many organizations such as ETSI, which is European Standardization Organization, have come up with reports and guidelines to aid in this migration approach or in this migration process. And I wanted to highlight this specific example by ETSI. They came up with this 3-step PQC migration approach, where in the first step you diagnose, you perform a diagnosis, you determine your stance towards the PQC migration. Basically, what you need to do is you need to get an overview of which cryptography am I using where, what kind of data am I handling, how long does this data need to be secure or confidential, what kind of hardware am I using, how long will I be using this hardware, what kind of dependencies towards my vendors and other organizations do I have. So this seems like a straightforward first step, but it's actually going to be quite complicated to perform a complete diagnosis. And then if you've done the diagnosis, if you've collected all of this information, then you can start planning your PQC migration. Basically, you get an overview of which systems to migrate when. And how to do this, what kind of people to involve in this migration. And then finally, in step 3, you can start executing this migration. And taking into account hybrid solutions where you combine post-quantum cryptography with classical cryptography to mitigate the risks of undiscovered vulnerabilities, and also taking into account this cryptographic agility. So this all seems rather straightforward, but it's going to be quite a complicated process. And in many reports, these 3 steps have been detailed out quite a bit more. Yes.
Thomas,
Thanks,
Thomas, just a quick note that there's 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I saw your hand. So I will wrap up with a few more slides and examples of some organizations that have already migrated to PQC, and then we will have some more time for questions. So you may have seen the news already that quite a few messaging apps such as Apple and also Signal, and therefore also WhatsApp, they have started rolling out post-quantum cryptography in their systems. Also, quite recently, Tutamail, an email client for protected email, they started deploying post-quantum cryptography. So that's quite nice. Even though we have all these challenges in deploying and designing post-quantum cryptography, we're already seeing post-quantum cryptography being deployed in practice more and more now. Another example that I wanted to give is Google. I think as of 2019 already, Google is protecting its internal communications from quantum threats. So, which basically means that the communication channels between their data servers is using post-quantum cryptography already. And also quite recently, the client side of internet communication channel can be protected by post-quantum cryptography as well. So if you use Chrome or Firefox or Edge or any of these browsers, then you can quite easily enable the support of post-quantum cryptography by turning on this flag. So that's the client side of the communication channel. Of course, this only means that your communication channel is protected against quantum attacks if the server also supports post-quantum cryptography. And if we look at the other end of the communication channel, then we see that, for instance, Cloudflare, which is a big content delivery network, indeed supports post-quantum cryptography. So if you turn on this flag, this option in your browser, and you set up a connection to a Cloudflare server, then you will be using post-quantum cryptography and protecting your information against quantum attackers. And if you look at this graph from Cloudflare, then it shows that we're nearing the 2% of the communication channels that are protected against quantum computers. So that's still not a lot, but we're expecting a large grow in these percentages the coming months and years, and especially when this becomes the default option in browsers. Now, this is my final slide, which also shows the NSA timeline for migrating US government agencies to post-quantum cryptography. And it basically shows that in 2033, they should be migrated for all different applications, for all different use cases to post-quantum cryptography already. So I would argue this is still quite a challenging task, but it's good that they have set out these timelines and taken the first steps in this direction. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Thomas, for a very interesting lecture. It's always very nice to hear something that's absolutely on the forefront, and whether you can see it or not, there are lots of hands being virtually clapped as well. Thomas, do you see the Q&A? Because if not, I'll just read the questions to you.
Let me see, I'm opening it right now. Yeah, I see the questions. So shall I just go over them?
Yes, please.
So the first question, what happens when quantum computers become easy to attain? Is it simply a race for who can defend versus who can attack? Yes, in some sense it is, but hopefully before that time arrives, we will all have migrated to post-quantum cryptography. So then it will be quite, quantum computers will not help you anymore to break into communication channels. So that's why we should start this migration process as soon as possible to make sure that we finish the migration before quantum computers become easy to attain. Second question, which entities possess the financial capacity to pursue quantum computing? Considering it's presumed costly, what are motivations for such an investment considering encryption is vulnerable to its existence? That's a very good question. So nowadays, it's still, of course, very costly to build quantum computers, and also quantum computers cannot do a lot of useful things, or maybe not even any useful things. So it's really an academic effort, and big companies like IBM, Microsoft are investing in building these devices, which takes like billions of dollars. But cryptography is not the only application area. So there's many more applications of quantum computers. For instance, you can devise new materials using quantum computers. You can think about using quantum computers to solve machine learning, artificial intelligence problems. So there's a lot of interest in building quantum computers, even though they're not interested in breaking cryptography. So there's quite a few motivations to invest in this. And of course, ideally, the cost of quantum computers and building quantum computers will decrease over time, which was the same thing that happened with classical computers. I believe it was in the 50s or 60s that the CEO of IBM said that there would be room for like 5 classical computers in the world, and now everyone has several computers. So that's something that will definitely change. Next, can cryptography be seen as better than quantum computers based on their algorithms? Well, I wouldn't phrase it like that. It's, in some sense, there's an arms race between the cryptographers and the code makers and the code breakers. And as of now, we have a couple of post-quantum candidates that seem to be unbreakable even by quantum computers. So you could say that these algorithms are indeed stronger than quantum computers, but yeah, that's another way of phrasing than what I would use. The next question: when quantum computers are more prevalent, does this mean we'll need new quantum-proof algorithms? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. So the reason is basically that we're now making assumptions on what quantum computers can do. And these assumptions are quite conservative. So when we design post-quantum cryptography, we're trying to protect against adversaries with very powerful quantum computers. So maybe even more powerful than what will ever exist. And the reason is that you can better be, it's better to be a bit too conservative than making not strong enough assumptions. So it's not necessarily the case that when quantum computers become more mature that we need to update our cryptography again. But we could see algorithmic developments, some new algorithms to run on quantum computers that deem cryptography insecure. Okay, let's see one more question. What are the key differences between traditional cryptographic algorithms and post-quantum cryptographic algorithms? And how do these differences address the potential threat posed by quantum computers to conventional cryptography? So on a high level, they're quite similar because they both use these one-way functions that this abstract mathematical building block that I introduced at the beginning. But the big difference is that they use different one-way functions. So they use different mathematical problems to build the cryptographic schemes. So for instance, for the conventional algorithms use the hardness of the factorization problem, while post-quantum schemes use the hardness of other mathematical problems. So for instance, hash-based cryptography uses the fact that it's very hard to find the pre-image of a hash function, even for quantum computers. Lattice-based cryptography uses the fact that it's very hard to find a short element in a lattice, even for quantum computers. So on a very abstract level, the design mechanisms are quite similar because you start with a one-way function with certain properties like a mathematical building block. But if you dive into the details, you see some very big differences. And these differences translate to practical performance characteristics such as key sizes and runtime, for instance, that you will encounter when using these cryptographic primitives. So hopefully that sort of answers the questions that were raised, and if not, please.
So Thomas, some more questions have arrived in my Teams client. They don't show up immediately unless I close the Q&A and go back to the Q&A. But there are two about tokenization. So if you see them refreshed, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll just read them to you.
Yes.
There's one interesting one about one-time pads.
Okay, I see that question as well. Would the one-time pad be broken with the development of the quantum computers? No. Short answer is no. So the one-time pad is actually provable secure. So that's a symmetric encryption scheme that we know how to prove secure. So it does not rely on the hardness of any mathematical problem. We actually know that it is secure. But it's only a symmetric key primitive. So you still have the key distribution problem. So it does not solve our issues. So considering the fact that WikiLeaks revealed information for events up to 2 years ago, the eavesdrop now and decrypt later strategy is suddenly quite frightening. Any comments on the education and learning hats of cybersecurity companies must invest in to accurately see 15 years from now with today in mind? Yes, that's a very good point. So indeed, you should be looking into the future quite far. At the same time, we do not want everyone to be designing their own cryptographic primitives. So at the same time, we're urging users and cybersecurity specialists to rely on standardized cryptographic algorithms and do not to design their own schemes. So in some sense, we've been trying to create awareness for the last couple of years, but at the same time, we were saying, okay, it's very urgent to start migrating to post-quantum cryptography, but do not build your own cryptography. So wait for the NIST standards to be ready. So there was like a sort of a mixed signal that we were sending out there. So in some sense, the amount of knowledge that you need is limited. You do not have to dive into the mathematical details to be able to use these schemes. And especially now that we have standards that are almost available, also standard implementations that are going to be ready to be deployed. Yes, it's a very good remark, and also it's quite frightening, as you mentioned. I see a couple more questions. I still have some time, right? Okay, good. Then I'll continue. When quantum computers are more, I already had this question. But tokenization versus cryptography for quantum computing. Cryptography has been found wanting in several instances. Kindly advise. So I do not fully understand the question, but tokenization heavily relies on cryptographic primitives. So it's not one versus the other. Also, tokenization does not solve all our cryptographic challenges. So cryptography is essential whether you're going to use tokenization or not. So in that sense, yeah, we need post-quantum cryptography anyway. Hopefully that somewhat answers the question. So maybe I can refresh again. Or did I cover all the questions already?
Thomas, since we're almost out of time, maybe I can just leave you with one last thing you could comment on. I think many people would be interested to know if the NIST competition has been open enough, and if people from other countries outside the United States should use it and believe in it, keeping in mind South Africa is a BRICS country, for example.
Yeah. That's a very good comment. I did not dive into that topic at all. So the NIST is indeed a US institute. So that sort of raises the question whether these are going to be US standards or global standards. Well, the idea from the beginning was that these are going to be global standards and that the NIST competition was going to be a global effort. So they tried to set it up as open as possible. So like all the implementations, submissions, everything was publicly available for all researchers and also non-researchers to take a look at all the documents and to analyze the schemes themselves and try to find vulnerabilities. And also many submissions came actually from outside of the US. So from Europe, Africa, Asia, they contributed heavily to this competition. So I would strongly argue that this is actually an international, a global initiative, and that many other countries or the EU, for instance, will actually follow the NIST standardization results. Yes, maybe to add one thing to that, before 2016, before they started the competition, they were actually looking for another country to pick up the glove and to lead this standardization initiative. But there was no other institute willing and capable of doing so. So NIST was a very natural candidate because of all the expertise that they have in-house, and also because they've led previous cryptographic standardization efforts. So for AES and SHA-3. So those are also cryptographic algorithms standardized by NIST and deployed globally now. So they were a very natural candidate, but because of the question you asked, they were also well, first looking for other organizations to pick it up to actually show to the world that it's not a US initiative. So hopefully that takes away that concern a little bit.
Thanks very much. We're a tiny bit over time. So Thomas, I'd like to thank you for a super interesting lecture. I'm sure everyone else is thankful as well. And if there are any follow-up questions, we'll get them to you via email or some other channel. So thanks again. And thanks everyone else for listening. And we'll let you take a very short break before you're onwards to your next lecture. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.